Okay, good afternoon. Welcome to afternoon number one, day one of Tent Talks. I am delighted to welcome Steve Hearsome here to Tent Talks for this afternoon. Steve's a writer and a thinker. His recent book, No Silver Bullet, seeks to debunk the myths of quick fixes to complex issues. He describes himself as being wired to ask questions and to get under the skin of things. And on his own admission, he likes to conduct and convene chewy conversations. As we embark on a period of change across the NHS and especially in BSW Hospitals Group and here at SFT, it's very easy to look for quick fixes for complex issues. Therefore, Steve's knowledge around leading through complexity will enable an important learning opportunity and reflection for us all. Steve, I'll hand the floor over to you and I look forward to some chewy conversations. Thank you.
Thank you. Good. You can hear me okay? Good. Lovely. Just going to take this off so I can move a bit more freely. Oh, the wind stopped. The talk I did earlier on, it was a bit like we were in a storm and we should have got it sponsored by WD-40 because this thing really creaks. So, we get sound effects. Um, so yes, I'm Steve Hearsome. Um, I'm not going to bore you with my CV. There's nothing worse than that. I've worked in change and organisations for the best part of 35 years. This previous speaker, one of your colleagues I listened to earlier this morning, had a wonderful story about his background. He said um, he was UK representative at the UN for space technology. Yeah, I'm not. My claim to fame is I used to work at The Guardian and I launched their dating service, Soulmates. So if you want to meet a Guardian reader, I'll tell you what to put in your advert. All right. So I'll leave it as that. You can find out more about me online. By all means, ask me questions afterwards. I'm happy to tell you anything. Unless, is anybody desperate to ask me something about me to reassure yourself I'm worth spending the next hour or so with? Nobody's ever asked me a question I've refused to answer. So, anybody want to ask me a question? Otherwise, I'll assume you're happy. You're happy. Good. Best question anybody ever asked me, by the way, in response to that was, what is your third favourite jam? Not your first, your third favourite jam. Brilliant question. So, when you invite somebody like me to do a talk like this, what you normally get is entertainment, inspiration, and answers. It tends to be what organizations hope for. Sorry, I'm not going to do all of that. I hope it'll be entertaining at points, because otherwise you may not be as engaged as you want to be. As to the inspiration, well, that's kind of up to you. Whether or not you find me inspiring or not, whatever that means, again, I'll leave that up to you. I'm not going to offer you answers because the stuff we're talking about today, there are no easy answers. So I'm going to actually offer you something slightly different. What I'm going to offer you is questions. I'm going to provoke your thinking, hopefully a wee bit. I'm going to offer you hopefully some useful discomfort in service of your learning. I would imagine that anything you've ever learned about yourself in your life that has been meaningful and genuinely useful has been preceded by a bit of a wriggle and wrestle. Why would this be any different? Okay. And I am going to offer you some suggestions, what you might usefully pay attention to. And I'm really aware that the context I'm talking to you today in is you've got a critical incident going on. So we are in the middle of complexity. We are in the middle of the mess of what it is to work in a modern organization when I think the technical term is, and excuse the language, when the shit is hitting the fan. We can be overly polite about what happens in organizations. They are messy places. They are complex places. What does it actually mean to work and to lead in them? So before we get into the meat of this, I have a question for you. Because our territory today is about navigating through complexity, whatever that is. And I'm going to be talking about the illusion of control and how that gets in the way and how that drives a need for silver bullets and quick fixes. But before we get into it, I want you to think about something. I want you to think about somebody alive or dead, real or fictional, who you admire as a leader or as somebody who works in organizations. And part of you kind of goes, I would aspire to be like that person. Okay? Have a think. And see if you can think of 2 or 3 qualities that they have that talk to why you admire them. Got it? Just let that roll around your head. We'll come back to it. Okay. So what's coming? We're going to talk about change and complexity. We are then going to talk about certainty and what drives the need for it in organizations, and silver bullets, why it is that organizations and leaders are often so drawn to them. Then we're going to talk about some of the most common myths that permeate organizations and the consequences of that. Oh, the wind's kicked in. There we go. Who's brought the WD-40? Did anybody bring it? No. Okay. And then I'll offer you some alternatives. All right. Oh, at the end of this, we're going to have a chunk of time for you to have some conversations and ask questions. The way we're going to structure that, I'm going to signal this now. I would imagine that some of you really hate being in big groups. Any of you don't like speaking in big groups? See, you're not going to tell me because you don't like speaking in big groups. So very deliberately, what we're going to do is you'll have a chance to have some table conversations so that you all get to speak, and then each table can feed in their thoughts. Okay. So it's not going to be a open Q&A where only the extroverted people stick their hands up and we only hear from them, because we are really boring when we dominate the room, because I'm one of those. So let's talk about change. The common way that organizations still think about change is like this, that it's linear, that we start with A and we get to B, and it's very straightforward. If we just do these steps, then everything will be fine. Have any of you ever worked with external consultants like me? Seeing some nods. Do they offer you lots of lovely, neat models? What happens when they meet reality? No. I once worked with a couple of NHS people who, between them, had, I remember, about 30 or 40 years' experience. And I showed them one of the most common leadership models around change. And their first response was they laughed. I said, why are you laughing? They said, because the language bears no relationship to our lived reality. Reality and the mess that organizations are in is not A to B. An A to B example would be, I worked with a university a few years ago with the IT function. And somebody said to me, have you heard about the computer in our server room? They still had a server room. I said, no, I have not heard about your computer. They said, yeah, it's been there for 10 years. And for the last 6 years, it's had a message on the screen saying, I'm broken, fix me. Now, the broken computer is an A to B fix. The reason it had been left for 6 years, when even though people knew it was broken and nobody had done anything about it, that's something else. There ain't no model that's going to help you with that one. The reality is a bit more like this. So some of you may have heard of a chap called Dave Snowden. Dave Snowden is a British thinker, and he tries to describe the mess of organizations. He takes a complexity lens. You don't need to read the detail, but in essence, he says there are simple problems, complicated ones, complex ones, and chaotic ones. And you need to adapt your behavior to respond to them. Okay? I'd largely agree. There's other people who've described complex problems, people like Keith Grint. There's a woman in the States called Glenda Oyang who does a really good job describing it another way. We try to find ways to describe the mess. Have any of you heard of VUCA? Come across that? No? Okay. VUCA, it's one of the most common acronyms for describing complex and messy change. Comes from the US military, post-Cold War, post-9/11. It was a way in which it was used to describe complexity. The problem is it's got a very Western lens. I once spoke to somebody from Beirut before the current troubles, and we were talking about this, and he laughed. He said, VUCA, it's just everyday life for us. VUCA is very easy to use when you live in relative stability. But if you don't like VUCA, I'll sell you a bit of Banny. If you don't like that, have some dance. If you don't want that, some tuna for the pescatarians amongst you. Failing that, you can have some facts, because we all like a bit of facts. And if that doesn't float your boat, have some rum. So here's my question. Just scan those and notice which one you are most drawn to. Which one best describes what you experience in your context in this organization? I really feel like I am on a ship in the sea now. Is the sun gone past the yard arm? Can I have a gin and tonic yet? Is that no? Okay. So hands up. Who likes VUCA? Right, got a couple of hands. Okay. Any votes for Banny? Dance. Oh, there's a Banny there. Dance. Got some dances over there. Tuners. Oh, Tuna's got a few more. Facts. few more still. Rupt. Okay, which one's the right one? Okay, I have been a bit mischievous. So VUCA is real. Banny is real. Dance was made up by Dave Snowden, the guy I just mentioned, because he got so frustrated with people coming up with ways of describing mess that he thought were pointless. Tuna's real. Oxford Side Business School. If you want to go and do your MBA there, you'll get a bit of tuna. Facts, I made up. For a talk in Germany in the autumn, I was going to call it farts. I kid you not. The R was going to be reality, but I decided that any audience I shared that with would probably guess that I was taking the mick. Right? And rupt is another one. Um, we like to find ways to manage our anxiety by turning things that are discomforting and anxiety inducing into things that we can describe easily and then create and treat as an abstraction. We do this with things like change and culture. So I did this talk with the leadership team. So Ian was there beforehand, and we were talking about, I asked the question, so do you talk about leading the change and driving the change in your organization? Is that what you do here? Yeah, you've turned it into an object. You've turned it into something that you can prod with a pokey stick or just move around, rather than the living thing that it is. And we change things into objects to manage anxiety, like culture becomes a thing. So, um, we're going to move on now to talk about why people are so drawn to silver bullets. But let's start with what I found when I was doing my research for the book. Oh, by the way, you can buy it. I'm selling it cheaper today. You don't have to. It's great for parrot cages and hamster cages as well, or door stops. But you won't get it cheaper anywhere else. It's only 12 quid. I wanted to offer it as a discount today for you. Okay. And I will not be offended if nobody buys any. I promise you. Much. Um, so one of the things I found when I was researching was in the late 90s, an American psychologist did some research, and he found that the thing that 19 out of 20 senior execs feared the most was their employees finding out how inadequate they felt. Let's think about that for a moment. Whatever you may imagine or think about your executives, often they are deeply anxiety ridden and they actually don't know what to do. And they're just as at sea as you sometimes are. The difference is it's actually not as okay for them to show it. One of my colleagues, a woman called Eva Applebaum, described to me a few years ago working with people around digital technology. She said one of her biggest challenges was working with groups of predominantly white middle-aged men, because funnily enough, boards are still occupied by lots of us. And she said the challenge was that these were people who'd signed off millions of pounds to pay for technology that they didn't understand and couldn't admit to themselves or each other that they didn't understand. Just think about that for a moment. All right? So the idea is this. The part of the reason why people look for silver bullets for quick fixes for complex problems is because there's a desperate need for certainty. And it's driven by a number of things, amongst which are the expectations that you have on yourselves and that other people have on you. You have your idealized notions of who you need to be. So, question I asked you, throw out some names of who you admire as leaders. Or Barack Obama, who else? Jacinta Ardern, great. Han Solo, lovely. Any advance on a Wookiee-loving sci-fi hero? Who, sorry? David Attenborough? Let's have a couple more. Who, sorry? John Maxwell. Excellent. And one more. Somewhere over there. Your mum. Lovely. That's lovely. When I did this with a US corporate in the States last year, it was fascinating. The most senior group, these are all just below the exec level, kind of N minus one, N minus two. That level, senior. A group of predominantly American people, almost to a man and woman, their examples, their archetypes were military figures and sportsmen and women. What do you imagine that organization is like to work in? And what do you imagine it is like for them when they can't live up to their ideals? So for you, what happens when you don't live up to who it is you hold, it's John Maxwell, in high regard? What happens if you're not enough like them? But there's also in organizations the organizational ideal. So we happen to have Ian over there. So what is the organizational ideal that you all hold for the perfect leader in Salisbury? What happens if your leaders don't meet that? Okay. So there's the expectations, there's a pace which you're all working at. There's the archetypes we've touched on. There's laziness, because frankly, it's too hard sometimes to think about how messy something is. Just give me a quick fix. There's fear and anxiety, fear of not knowing, fear of not being able to admit that you don't know what to do. There's a need to please. Parent-child behaviour is rife still in organisations. And why wouldn't it be? Because we all came from families with all the mess that's there. And there's stuff like just the overload of work and the cognitive overload and the need to manage risk. All of these things. And the implications of this are then that leaders and organizations get driven to look for the solutions that are being sold by a multitude of people that offer certainty. And they do this in part because of unconscious shame and anxiety that drives decision-making behavior. There's a kind of functional collusion that goes on. It works beautifully. Okay? It's a lot easier to buy from a McKinsey's or from a consultant or from a thought leader this model when they're telling you, of course, Steve, it's going to work. Of course, it's going to solve your problems in your hospital. Right? One of my clients is a clinician in a South London trust who also has organizational development responsibilities. He recently, this was last year only, he was given the responsibility of liaising with not one, not two, but three of the biggest consulting firms in the UK who had all simultaneously been contracted to review one of their major departments to the tune of an excess of £70,000. And his telling of it was that the leadership of that organisation was so anxiety riven that they found not just one but three consultancies, and it was absurd. But he couldn't challenge it because he knew that he would be spat out if he did. So he just had to kind of liaise with them. Right? This stuff costs money. So the thing is, in human society, we always have had monsters. And there are our folk tales and our stories are boundless about minotaurs and werewolves and vampires. And the werewolf, this is one from Germany, it would be a good example. And with our werewolf, even in modern day, we have Bianco del Toro, or you can have a bit of American Werewolf from London, or a bit of Blade for the best opening scene ever in a vampire film. Okay. And all of these are creatures who, as the folklore would tell us, there needs to be a hero who's going to fix it. Preferably a tall, masculine, quick thinking, decisive, certain, ideally slightly sexy. We're veering away from me clearly, moment by moment. Okay. But joking aside, this stuff is real because in the US a few years ago they did some research, and the average height of a Fortune 500 CEO was in excess of 6 foot. That kind of rules me out. So this stuff goes on unconsciously. And think just for a moment who you really want to be leading, whether it be the country or organization. Okay, what are you looking for? Are you looking for somebody who's going to be really useful, or are you still aspiring for some form of heroic leader? And we also want our Lone Ranger to come with a silver bullet, a thing that's going to slay the mythical beast. Now, organizationally and in the world of change, we have Wile E. Coyote. And Wile E. Coyote is the patron saint of silver bullets. The reason is this. Now, Wiley has got a problem, a very complex one, in the form of the Roadrunner. He can't touch the flipping thing. So Wiley, like any good person, goes to his nearest consulting firm, namely the Acme Corporation, purveyors of all forms of models, tools, methodologies guaranteed to solve his complex problem. Now, we're going to have an advert now because we can't get YouTube to skip the adverts, but we'll see the video in a moment. But one of the things I did notice when we were doing this beforehand is advertising is also another example of silver bullets. Because when have you ever seen an advert that says, not sure if this is going to work for you, might be a crap product, can't say with any certainty. Advertising fuels our need for certainty. Marketing sells us certainty. This one, there we go, youfurnish.com, your perfect furniture finder. Not your good enough furniture finder. It's selling you certainty. And every time Wiley tries something, it explodes. And he tries again and again. And the same thing happens repeatedly. The only difference between Wiley and your average senior leader is that, unlike us human beings, he's utterly without doubt. He's utterly certain that the next time Acme will sell him a solution that will work. Apart from that, he's the perfect example of the quest for the silver bullet. So how does this manifest in real life? In The Wizard of Oz, we have the wizard. And the little dog Toto, at a certain point in the film, pulls back the curtain to reveal, appropriate enough, a white middle-aged man, elderly man, who's pulling lots of levers, generating lots of smoke, lights, and magic and pizzazz. But behind it is just somebody who is desperately trying to appear more than they are. And when you peel back the curtain of the market and silver bullets, we start to see how things really are. Leadership models. A few years ago, the lovely people at the King's Fund did a report. And in it, they detailed every single report that had been done in the NHS to that point. This was up until 2010. And each one of those reports said what the NHS needed to do to address problems with leadership and management. And since then, we've had adaptive leadership, leader as follower, servant leadership, systems leadership. Then you had the leadership cube, I seem to recall. And now you've got the messenger review, which is recommending further models of what's going to fix leadership in the organizations that you all work in. And I'm beginning to wonder if maybe they're missing something. That maybe there isn't a silver bullet for leadership. And most leadership development, I mean, it's a huge industry, has had a fortune spent on it, but most of it is performative. People like me turn up with people like you, and you turn up as good learners, and I turn up and hope to be possibly liked by you, and you hope that I like you, and I tell you stuff about theories of leadership, and everybody goes home thinking they've done a good job, and nothing changes. So my approach to leadership work is I'm interested in how you show up and the impact you have. I'm interested in the messy reality of organizations. So we're in Groundhog Day. Oh, by the way, I like furry mammals. All my slide decks have furry mammals in because PowerPoint is so dull. So I make a point of putting furry mammals in. This is the second one. You've had Wiley. There is still one more to come. Okay, just let you know now. See if you can spot it. Okay, but it is Groundhog Day for me, and you're in Groundhog Day when it comes to what the NHS is doing with leadership. Then you have business schools as the next one. Business schools, an example. I was talking to somebody from a major international business school recently who said, the thing is, we normally find that our clients come to us, they've already been to 3 or 4 of our competitors. And they then come to us, and we're all broadly speaking, doing the same thing. And we're starting to realize that maybe it's not working. And they were talking to me and some colleagues at the Tavistock Institute of Human Relations, where I also work, about approaches to change leadership that embrace the unconscious processes in organizations and messy reality. Then business schools sell uncertainty. They sell you MBAs by saying, come and do our MBA. Get a big salary. Join this network of influential people who work in global corporations. They don't sell you uncertainty or doubt. Consultancies. How many of you have worked with external consultants, out of curiosity? Okay. Bet you love them, don't you? I think that's the best laugh at the back there. Yeah, okay. So let's be really clear. There are some very, very good consultants in the large firms. I've met many really talented consultants. The issue is actually not the consultants. The issue is the system with which they operate. Large consulting firms do not sell you doubt. They sell certainty. They sell you a model or a tool or methodology that they say is guaranteed to work. And all their marketing supports that. The issue with thought leadership, for me, is thought leadership comes from the consulting industry. And they use it to create an argument for something like AI. You need as an organization to address AI and simultaneously evoke anxiety in you, because if you don't, this is what's going to happen. And then they say, oh, by the way, here's how we can help. And we'll sell it to you with total certainty it's going to work. Okay. Why don't we call thought leaders thought provokers? Thought fondlers? Why do they have to be thought leaders? there is another example of how we want to put people on a pedestal. And then we come to gurus, and I've got a competition for you, and there are prizes, okay, which include chocolate and wine, and a free copy of my book, which you can use for hamster cages, as I said. And this is your task on your tables, okay? I would like you, in a moment, in response, well, I shall give you the run up to this. Simon Sinek is a really good example of a thought leader, or people regard him as one. And if you follow Simon Sinek or like him, do you like him? What do you like about him? Anybody willing to say? Oh, it's thought provoking. Right. Right. Yeah. So the thing about Sinek, and he does do some good stuff, is notice what he does. Um, they use simple language often with juxtapositions, preferably binary, black and white, either or, and they often assume universal notions of goodness, greatness, etc. And in a sense, there's nothing wrong with that, except when it oversimplifies what is inherently messy. But our responses to people like Sinek are problematic. There was one of his posts on LinkedIn a few years ago, about 2, 3 years ago, that I responded to. I occasionally would, because I'd just get frustrated with the simplicity, and I'd find myself with his people who really like him kind of attacking me for questioning his guru-ness. And there was one day there were 6 consecutive comments that all had a one-word comment. Have a guess what that word was, and imagine you're in a church. What one word might that be? Close. Amen. 6 consecutive comments, all saying amen. We have now truly reached the stage where we're in the Church of Sinek. Okay. So I would encourage you to be more critical of people who offer you certainty and simple solutions. Okay. So I want you to come up with your own guru-like tweet or LinkedIn post. That's what I like to do. You can use AI and the internet if you want, but you'll get more kudos and more likely to win a prize if you come up with it yourself. And prizes will be awarded. I am the judge. Sorry, there will be no way you can appeal that. It's entirely subjective and in my opinion. Clue is you'll get extra brownie points if you don't use technology. And if you can manage the kind of double thing of, on the one hand, sounding really profound, but on the other hand, totally absurd, you've hit the mother lode. Okay, so that's the objective. You've got a few minutes to come up with your own guru-like short statement. Go for it. Okay. I know there's a few that have been created, so let's see what we got. So we just want one or two. So which tables want to offer up a guru-like statement? This table looked like we're going great guns. Okay, so do you want to stand up and shout them out over the creaking? Go on. Sorry, that one I'm going to write down. I mean, so that is the bar. If you got anything that can beat that, then we just go home. Okay. No, but I like it. It's no, that's nice because that's got a nice patronising tone to it. I like that one. That's good. Thank you. Thank you for that table. So, which other table would like to throw the yes, and then we'll come to the back one. Oh my goodness me! You can never be profound unless you're willing to be pro-lost. Never. Did you come out of that on your own? So just so you know, these are going on LinkedIn in the next couple of days, and I'm going to be crediting you as an organisation. Just okay. Again, we're now. This is good standard. Okay, which table? I saw a hand. Yes, that one back. Oh, subtle, subtle. I'm gonna have to. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Any advance on those? Yeah. So that see, this is going to be hard because that one is so real. I mean, that could be someone like Sinek. Oh, good. Any advance on that? Yeah. I think that's a voice from the system, isn't it? That's brilliant. Okay. Anyone want to throw their hats in the ring? Yeah. If time isn't on your side, chase that clock. Oh, there's so much machismo in that. Ah, that's good. I like that. Good. So, I think what's the first one? It was this one. What's the? And then it was you can be profound. You can never be profound unless you're willing to be pro. Right. I think there's okay. So for the let's have so cheers for the changes hard tell you. Cheers for the profound one. I think that edges it over here, doesn't it? Just ever so slightly. So you have a choice. You've got a choice between chocolate, red or white wine, or a book. Have a chocolate. Right. So the other table. What's the other table? Who was the? Is that your table? I'll tell you what. Do you want a book or wine? Right. Since there's so many, have both. Good. And what was? We'll give one more out. What was the beaver? You want the beaver? Okay. So cheers for beaver. Cheers for when changes the problem. Sorry, when changes the problem, change the problem. I think they may have edged it because they're just louder than you. So do you want a book? Yeah, you have to spit it, or do you want another bottle of wine? Wine. Do you want the book? There we go. Have both. Well done, all. That was awesome. That's made my day, frankly. I could just pack up and go home now, quite happy. So, and more seriously, notice how easy that is in a sense. You could all be thought leaders. Maybe you are. Right. And then we've got the methodologies and theories that you get sold left, right, and centre. And all of these are just panaceas. They're ways of managing anxiety. That's what they are. So we're going to move on to. Oh, sorry, yeah. And this is just to ram that home. In a sense, they're like Linus's blankie. They're soothers. So with deep compassion for the senior leaders in the room, when I work with senior leaders often, they will actually talk about the fact that there is something deeply reassuring that you want to cling to when somebody comes and offers you certainty. It is like a blankie. They'll own up to it. Now, as I said, there are loads of myths, like the vampire. My favourite mythological creature I discovered when I was researching this recently is the fire-breathing Japanese chicken. I can't think of anything more wonderfully absurd than a fire-breathing Japanese chicken. I don't have a picture of it, unfortunately, but we have many. And there are myths when it comes to change, and myths that are deeply damaging when you're trying to navigate and work your way through complexity. And I'm going to just touch on a few of them. There are many more, but these are the ones that are figural for me in my mind. So the first one I talk about here is the myth of fixability. And this is the idea that there's a solution out there if you just look hard enough. If you just look hard enough. The thing is, if there was a silver bullet, you would all be going to the same consultant, the same guru, or buying the same book at Waterstones. So clearly there isn't. Clearly. And yet, we keep looking for one. Kind of complex problems, they need to be lived with. They can't just be fixed. They can be managed to an extent. And yes, you kind of have to navigate your way through them. The next one is the myth of acceptance, which is this idea that if you just communicate well enough and you train people well enough and you run enough communications workshops and you send out enough emails, that everybody will accept the change. That clearly works, doesn't it? Now, I'm sure, and again, because we've got a lovely mix here of some of the most senior people in the organisation here and other people. And trust me, organisations desperately do try to do the right thing. There's some research that shows that even when change is communicated well, it is underdone by a factor of 10. You have to repeatedly communicate the same thing for people to hear it in different ways. So the myth of the acceptance of change is that we assume that people do need to accept it. Why? You've heard of resistance to change, one of my least favorite terms in the world. People don't resist change. I've only ever met one person in the NHS, interestingly, who I thought was genuinely resistant to change. I said to him, he was working with one of his colleagues and they were practicing dialogue. And I said, is there anything your colleague could say to you that would lead you to change your perspective, your opinion on what is happening? Any data, any information? He said, no. It's the only person I've ever met like that. People who resist change just have a different set of data and a different experience. You don't need to worry about the resistance to change ones because they care. They've got energy. The ones to worry about are the apathetic ones. Right? I did look for an example of the myth of acceptance in the NHS, and the best one I could find was Care.Data, the program from a few years ago. The NHS sent out leaflets to 22 million households. I'm sure they were very good, but people didn't accept the change. There was lots of communication. The myth of culture change. And I'm using Acme again because there's lots of models about culture change. One of my clients a few years ago was describing to me, this is in a big retail firm in the UK, one of the biggest. They were asked by one of the internal teams, come and help us with culture change. So what they did was they turned up with a slide deck filled with all the models that all the consultancies that organisation had worked with over the years had suggested as culture change. And that organisation had worked with every single major consulting firm that you can name, including then the next level down and loads of boutiques. And they said to their client, look, maybe it's not the models. Maybe it's something else. And the client said, no, can't be. It has to be. So the internal said, okay, fair enough, we'll go away. If you need us, you know where we are. 3 months later, phone rang. Can we talk again? We think you're right. Okay. There's some research that was done by Henley Business School recently that showed that, and I'm going to read this because I think it's important to note. 72% of formal culture change initiatives show no meaningful improvement in employee trust, engagement, or retention. Culture is lived; it isn't laminated. And by the way, it's very easy to make your senior leaders responsible for this. But I notice in organisations how people sometimes hold their leaders to a higher standard than themselves and their colleagues. It cuts both ways. You can expect reasonably your senior leaders to be congruent in their behaviour with whatever your values might be, but so do you. Okay. 59% of employees said every week they saw senior leadership actions contradict stated values. When senior leaders changed their behaviour, whether how they ran meetings, how they responded to challenge, how they made decisions, trust scores went up by 26%. So culture change is about show, not tell. You do have to model it. Okay. If you want a different experience of your team or the organisation, you need to practice behaviours, not aspire to them. You've got to practice them. There's a big myth. So the idea that if you just change your leader, everything will be fine. Really? It'd be great if we could run an experiment that would prove or disprove this. Good news is we have an ongoing living one. It's called FA Premier League. This guy called Paul Sweeney describes this in his book Magnetic Nonsense rather beautifully. The idea is this. Apologies to those of you who don't like football. So there we have Manchester United, and they've just appointed Mr. Carrick, I believe, or about to. They've had some great managers who've done really well elsewhere. Maybe it's not about the managers. And then you say, well, are there any other examples? Well, of course, then there's Chelsea. And I can't even keep up with them. They appointed Xavi Alonso a couple of days ago. I haven't got a picture of him up here yet. And then if you want to move on from them, we can then move on to Spurs. And I could only fit De Zerbi on at the bottom there. Didn't have room for it. Okay? Maybe it's not about the managers. Maybe it's not just about the leaders. It's a bit more complex than that. So what's needed? You need to learn to sense and respond. So a bit like a child does when they're really young. They sense and respond their environment. They sense and respond to the physical environment, to what's going on, and they respond the best they can, even if they fall flat on their backsides. They pick themselves up and they try again. Sensing and responding doesn't mean knowing what the answer is before you try something. You need to cultivate both and thinking. So in Agile, done well, it is both a program of activity that has a clear sense of direction and energy, but you stop to think and notice and discuss what's going on when it's appropriate. It's both and speed and slowness. You've got to ask better questions. And I recognize that sometimes asking really apparently innocent questions can get you in a lot of trouble in organizations. Do any of you get described as being the organizational cynic or a troublemaker? Any of you had that experience? Right. Mike, thank you for sticking your hand up. That takes some bravery. Often when I meet people who say that to me, my response to them is normally, so do you just ask lots of questions that people don't like? Yeah. So often people who are described as cynics is because they're just asking the questions that are uncomfortable. Right? Dialogue. You've got to get better at dialogue. Wiley and the Roadrunner just need to have a better conversation. But dialogue, learning how to do it well, means really being able to work with difference and work with tensions and conflict. Final, furry mammal, otters, my favourites. Um, you've got to do accountability with rigor. I've noticed in recent years that leadership teams, and they don't always disclose this to you until it's too late when you're working with them at a team level, are really poor at holding each other to account around task and relationship. By the way, it's not just leadership teams, it's all teams. Let me ask you a rather direct question and be honest with yourselves. In your teams, are you really rigorous at holding each other to account around task, i.e., I said I would do this by next Tuesday? Have you held me to account? And behavior. The way I'm behaving is not congruent with how we agreed we're going to work in this organization. How are you rigorous at that? Yes. Someone nods. No, I see some shaking. So and I appreciate that that is challenging because you risk the possibility of conflict. But unless you can work that muscle, you're going to find it really hard to do some of the other stuff. And you have to attend to containment. And containment is a psychological term. It talks about what do you need to have in place to manage the anxiety that invariably exists in organizations. And when you're going through change, it spikes. And the kinds of things you need to attend to prevent things getting really mushy are these. Things like clear purpose, strategy, and goals, effective aligned leadership, boundaries, blah, 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 blah. You can read that. So have a look at those and ask yourself, how many of those are in a good enough place for us at the moment? Are they all in place? Looking good? No. So somebody just give me a sense, if you're willing, how many of them need attending to? Anybody willing to? Yeah? Okay. So is that accountability, that behavior is accountability? Yeah. Good. Any others?
I feel like we're making good progress towards them.
Yeah.
I think the one that keeps coming up for me is that bit about trying to connect
Right.
centrally.
Right.
That's stepping away.
And that is the one that most organizations think they can leave behind and drop. And you are at risk of that more than most because you are in the middle of a really tough situation. And of course, I mean, during COVID, even worse, right? The thing is, though, I can't teach you how to go any quicker than you are. You already work at 100 miles an hour. How do you know if you're running 100 miles an hour in the right direction or into a brick wall or over a cliff? The only way you know is by slowing down long enough to make sense of things. Right? And the way you do this is you build scaffolding. And scaffolding like they have in Hong Kong, which is bamboo and can flex. If it's rigid, it won't flex. You can't just tell people and make things really tight and rigid because people are not like that. You have to be able to have conversations to allow it to flex. So all of this adds up to one thing which I'm going to share with you through a metaphor. Let's hit play. So this is from a 1930s film called Howls a Poppin'. Any of you Lindy Hop dancers or swing dancers? No? That guy there is a chap called Frankie Manning. He died a few years ago. Um, Frankie Manning, I actually saw when I used to do Lindy Hop dancing and swing dancing until my knee gave out. And in the early noughties, I went to a weekender and Frankie Manning was there in his 80s. And he danced beautifully. Not like that, because he was in his 80s. But he danced with such elegance and such beautiful poise with his partner, who moved around him at speed, and he'd learned how to dance differently. If you're going to navigate complexity and work with change differently, you need to learn how to dance differently when the context shifts and the music changes. If doing a cha-cha is working for you, but the context changes and you need to do a rumba or balboa, or if you need to do a funky chicken, I like funk music, so that's my choice of dance, or you need to do a break dance, then you're going to end up either flat on your backside or out of time with everything that's going on around you. How do you learn to dance differently? What muscles are you going to need to work if you're going to respond to what's really happening around you? And you will make mistakes. And the other thing about this, why this metaphor works for me, is of course, in the middle of change, you will at points be in the middle of a dance floor and everybody can see you. Everybody can see you. What do you need to attend to when you're in the middle of the dance floor and you need to dance differently? Okay. So we're now going to pause there. I have some questions for you. And these are they. From what I've talked about, what do you agree with? What do you disagree with? What are the implications? What's going to make this different to you attending any other talk where you just sit there and go, well, that's been really interesting. Steve said some interesting stuff. I'm going to go away now and nothing changes. The only way anything ever changes with something like this is if something is provoked or evoked in you, you kind of go, hang on a minute. Right. So what has caught your attention here today? What might the implications be for you personally? Because that's how change will happen here, by one of you, at the very least, doing or saying something different or dancing differently. Otherwise, nothing will change. And what questions have you got for yourselves, for each other, or for me? Okay. So have a conversation on your tables for a few minutes, and then we'll hear from you. And again, for those of you who don't want to have your voices heard because you prefer not being so visible, make sure your questions or your observations are fed in for whoever's going to represent your table. Yeah. Thank you. Okay. Shall we reconvene? So, questions, observations, reflections, and we've got a roving mic. So, who would like to say something or ask? Have I struck you dumb? Went back. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Steve. That's been brilliant. I'm actually a volunteer here and a governor. So I hear quite a lot of the discussions at that high level, public board meetings. BSW is now a group.
Yeah.
And one feels that it's the structure which is going to resolve many of the issues, but it might be fairly rigid structure. So I like your bamboo structure where it needs to flex. It's going to take time to see how that plays out.
Yeah.
There will be benefits, but one wonders what the risks are and how it impacts on staff, services. And I don't know what the time frame is for that.
Well, there's a little nerdling kicker in that. So a few years ago, I had a conversation with a global, I think, a construction firm, 4,000 people spread across 2 or 3 continents, and they said we've just done a restructure. We've just gone from, I think it was they've gone from divisional structure to matrix, something like that. And we said, oh, how's it gone? And they said nothing's changed. I said, why? And she said, because the top 30 people are behaving exactly the same way. And you can rearrange the furniture all you want, but if you're still sitting in the chairs and using the tables and the fixtures and fittings in the same way, then nothing will change. And again, I'll say this, it is partly about power as well, and the most senior people do need. Have we still got any of the senior leaders in here? So check. No? Right. So not because I'm going to say anything, terribly controversial, and so too you lot. So one of the things I said at the end of the last session is when I work with senior leaders, but often with change practitioners, internals or external change people, I'll ask them 2 things. 2 questions you lot have got to ask yourselves if you're in change work. 1, how do I succeed in this organization? 2, how do I be of most service? And sometimes those 2 are going to be in opposition. And there's no right answer to that because you have got families to feed, mortgages to pay. Just be honest with yourself. Because if you're going to be of service, back at the beaver table, like our friend there, you might need to embody the difference that the system needs, which might be really uncomfortable. Okay. So, yeah, just rearranging the furniture is useful but not sufficient. What else? Yes. Oh, bring the microphone. It's all right because they're recording for the podcast. They want to lose your wisdom.
Hello, thank you, Steve. My question is around, do we not sometimes overcomplicate things? I know you appreciate you're saying that things are complex. So we have the Improving Together.
Yeah.
We're going through that at the moment. And one of the things that it does quite nice is it breaks down a problem to work out what the actual problem is, which I quite feel like is sort of an opposite to you see there's lots of complexity, but at some point you do need to simplify it and get right down to the basics. And I think even in the conversations we have around a problem, it almost becomes far more complicated. And I think there's an element where sometimes we are just overcomplicating things. Is that just naive and
No, I don't think
negative?
it is. I think, and both might be true. So when it's something genuinely complex, where just describing it is going to be really messy. When is it that we overcomplicate the description of things because we are missing something? We're anxious because we like big words. I mean, do any of you like big words? I mean, I do sometimes. I like my jargon. I'm gonna just take an opportunity to offer you very quickly a way of thinking about what you're describing. You can actually take away and use. Do you want that? No? Okay. So this is not my thing. Comes from the woman I mentioned earlier, Glenda Oyang. And the way she would say you need to approach these things, and it's really simple. And I can send it to you, Carl, couldn't I? If you wanted to distribute it, there's no problem sending it out. But it's really simple, and it's like this. So give me a statement. What's a big problem you're facing at the moment? Okay. Critical instant, going home. Right, so let's just say we were going to do this. We won't do this for real, but I'm just using that. So I just want you to have in mind that this is what we're thinking about, right? So the first thing you do is you say, what do we want to be different relative to dealing with that problem? And that could be anything. It could be behaviours, roles, resources, the amount of money you've got, the coffee they serve in the canteen, the availability of your favourite chocolate to give you energy. I mean, literally anything. The colleagues you work with, the colleagues you don't work with. I don't want to be that. What needs to be different is that person, Steve Hearson, needs to be out of my team. Anything. And then what you say is, what do I want to be the same? Actually, I do want the same people. I do want the same structure. I do want to stay in this job because one of the differences might be I want to leave. Okay. And you do all that, you'll end up with loads of things. And then you say, okay, if you were to pick 3 things to either dial up or dial down, so you want to dial that down or dial this up. Sometimes dialing up the good stuff makes things better. You pick 3. Could be all on one side or other, doesn't make a difference. And then you say, we've got to start somewhere. What's the difference that's going to make a difference? If you had to pick one thing to try, which one would you start with? And you pick it. Maybe it's that one. And then you do it. And the reason why this kind of works, it can work, is because it kind of forces you to kind of get down to what actually really do I want to be the same and different. I had a client years ago where it was a lovely client. He sent me a 2-page description of what the problem was. And I did this exercise with him. What it turned out to be, the problem was nested, I think, in the 4th paragraph on the first page. And what the problem was all about how to get business analysts out in the regions of this corporate to have robust, straight conversations with MDs of these different divisions. But you would never have known that from the document. Okay. So once you get into what you want to be same and different, so another way of thinking about this, 9 months after you finish this work, what will you see, hear, or feel that will tell you it's different or better? Simple language to describe problems. So I don't know if that's useful, but I'd encourage you, if you're struggling to make sense of it, strip it right back. Yeah. Okay. Any more? Anybody would disagree with me? Hugely, I like disagreements. What do you not like? Good. Say more. Go on, because that'd be interesting to. Yeah.
We were a bit upset about
Yeah.
Simon Sinek because we thought that the gurus still have a place because they make you think.
They do. The question is, how are you responding to them, and also what are the assumptions underpinning what they're saying? That's the trick. And are you going along with it because it sounds really reassuring and neat, or is it genuinely reflecting something that is useful? Anything else? Because we're nearly at time. Last chance. Yes, this table over here. Oh, microphone's there.
I'll shout. So when you said external companies come in with a tool
Yeah.
and they never work,
Not never.
well, yes,
Yeah.
sometimes don't work, or
Yeah.
I was thinking about improving together.
Yeah.
Right. So technically that was an external methodology that we brought in. But I think the difference is when we talked about it, it was how you then adapt it, adopt it, flex it, make it work for you as an organization. And maybe fundamentally you don't say, we're bored with that one, what's the next one? I think, I've worked here a long time and this is the one that is stuck for the longest so far. And we've heard a brilliant example of how it's working and helping. So there's something about flexing, I think.
Well, that's it. And I'm assuming that you've adapted it to your context.
Yeah.
That's the difference.
Yeah.
If you assume that what works in one context is going to work in another without changing it, well, frankly, you're deluded.
Yeah.
So if you think that what worked in a Toyota car factory, like Lean Six Sigma, is going to work in an NHS acute trust in Hampshire in exactly the same way, well, what are you on? Okay, it's totally different. Doesn't mean you can't learn stuff, but be really clear about the assumptions that you're using to do that. You're familiar with Birdsong? So have you heard of Birdsong? Birdsong, they're a Dutch care organisation, about 10 or 15,000 people. They have virtually no centre, virtually no HR, no strategy department. All the local teams are 4 or 5 people. They run their own stuff. They decide on what their primary task is. They decide on their objectives. They do the work. Highest patient scores of any organisation of its type in that country. Power and authority is deeply devolved. And there's a lovely case I was told about, and it's in the book, I mention it, of an organization that tried to replicate it, but the people who tried to replicate it didn't want to devolve power and authority. Funnily enough, it didn't work. Okay, so it's how do you adapt what it is you're bringing to the local context? That's the key bit. Yeah. So it doesn't mean don't learn from what's worked elsewhere, but notice your assumptions. Yeah. Anything else? I think we're at time. Last one. Any burning ones? No? In which case, thank you. I said to somebody else earlier on, your contributions for the Guru competition are possibly, I think you're up there in the best set I've ever had. And they will be on my LinkedIn profile this week because they are just genius level. So I have got a gift from you lot today and I'm deeply grateful. Thank you. You just scan it and you can take one.